Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Virtual Science Cafe. Thanks for being here. Thank you for joining us. Glad that you could tune in to tonight's very special broadcast. My name is Chris Smith. I am curator for the Daily Planet Theater at the wonderful North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. And this evening, as always, I am your host for our Virtual Science Cafe. Hope that you're doing well, staying safe. Again, thank you so much for tuning in. Since we can't be at the museum is closed right now, we got really creative and brought our virtual programs, brought our real programs online. We turned to virtual because we know you enjoy all the sciencey cool stuff that comes out of the Museum of Natural Sciences, and we didn't want to stop bringing the great stuff to you. So here we are with our Science Cafe series. Let me know over in the chat or in the comments if this is your first Virtual Science Cafe, or have you watched like all 8 or 9 of them that we've done? And let me know how you found the program. Did you get an email from the museum? Did you find us on Facebook? That way we can continue to bring you more excellent, great programming and put it in the places where you want to see these great shows. So thanks for being with us. Glad that you're here. Tonight we have a very special guest. As the presentation goes along, remember, you can put questions and comments about the talk in the chat box and in the comments. We'll be monitoring those and pulling out questions once we get to the end to present to our guest speaker, who I'm going to introduce to you right now. Tonight's guest is Paul Bogard. Paul is the author of The End of Night, Searching for Natural Darkness in an Age of Artificial Light, and also a book called The Ground Beneath Us, From the Oldest Cities to the Last Wilderness, What Dirt Tells Us About Who We Are. Paul is also an associate professor of English at James Madison University in Virginia. And he told me before we got started that right now he's spending a lot of time in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Paul, welcome to the program.
It's good to be here. Thank you for having me.
So glad that you could join us. I'm really excited about tonight's topic, dark skies. But before we get to that, how are things in Minnesota? How are you?
Oh, they're good. It's sunny and breezy and yeah, starting to feel like summer.
Whereas it's been raining here off and on today, and it's been over 80 degrees already this week. So yeah. Summer always comes a little bit earlier in North Carolina, I guess.
Yep.
So tell me a little bit briefly, what brought you to research dark skies, light pollution for the end of night? How did you get started in this?
I think it goes all the way back. I'll talk about this a little bit in the talk, but it goes all the way back to being a kid. And we have a cabin up in northern Minnesota. So I grew up with beautiful dark skies like everybody ought to. And I think that just kind of made its impression on me. And many years later, when I was looking for something to write about, I started to learn more about light pollution because once you start to I guess I wanted to learn more about the stars. And when you want to learn more about the stars, you very quickly learn, whether you want to or not, about light pollution, because it gets in the way of seeing what they tell you that you ought to be seeing. And I realized there really wasn't a book out there that talked about this problem. And there's so many aspects to light pollution. It's not just about seeing the stars, and kind of the rest is history.
Well, I'll save my personal anecdote about dark skies for after the presentation. So everybody, if you stick around, you'll get that story. But let's jump right in to tonight's presentation. Paul, the show's yours.
All right. Well, let's get the screen up here. There we go. Good. Welcome.
Looks good.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thanks again to Chris for having me and for hosting. I want to tell you about The End of Night, my book, how it came to be, and the issues involved in it, and I might read a short passage or two just to give you a sense of what it sounds like. I'm very happy to be involved with anything that has to do with science. That said, I have to admit that I am an English professor, so I come to this book certainly and this topic from uh, not an astronomer's background, but a lover of the night sky and a lover of night in general. I've just always been somebody who um, at night, it seemed the world seems to kind of slow down in speed and size, and I like the quiet, and I like the night sky, and I like the just how it feels, and so um, that all eventually led to this book, The End of Night, that came out. Boy, it's almost 6 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago, and it's been quite a ride since then. I always like to say, when people say, "What inspired you to write this book?" and I say, growing up in Minnesota and having a cabin in the northern part of the state, and the skies, especially when I was a kid, they looked something like this. I remember the Milky Way above pine trees. That's really kind of what embedded on me, and that I carry with to this day. I still think that's what a night sky ought to look like. So I spent a lot of time out on the dock near the lake, and the reason I showed this image, even though it's a little blurry, is that I want to talk for just a second about how the night isn't just the view of the stars, it's also how it feels out there, right? So if you look at this image, when I see this image, I think of a summer night with a big moon, and you can hear the insects all around, and maybe the frogs, maybe there's the sound of a loon calling in the distance, maybe if some fish jumping, the summer breeze. I mean, night is not just our vision, our sight, what we see, but it's all our senses, and that's one thing I love. All my life, I've taken the canoe out into the lake and just under a sky like this, and kind of laid back and look up and watch for shooting stars, look at the constellations, and it's just always been an important part of my life. I've also had some once in a lifetime experiences. And I'd like to just read a couple paragraphs from the book that'll tell you about one of those experiences. So this is early in the book when I'm talking with an astronomer about some of the things that I've seen, and this is the story that I tell. The most beautiful starry night I've ever seen was more than 20 years ago when I was backpacking through Europe as an 18-year-old high school graduate. I had traveled south from Spain into Morocco, and from there south to the Atlas Mountains at the edge of the Sahara, to a place that when I look on a map, I can no longer find. A place where nomadic tribes came in from the desert to barter and trade. One night in a youth hostel that was more like a stable, I woke and walked out into a snowstorm. But it wasn't the snow I was used to in Minnesota or anywhere else I'd been. Standing bare chest a cool night, wearing flip-flops and shorts, I let a storm of stars swirl around me. I remember no light pollution. I remember no lights. But I remember the light around me, the sense of being lit by starlights, and that I could see the ground to which the stars seemed to be floating down. I saw the sky that night in 3 dimensions. The sky had depth, some stars seemingly close, some much farther away. The Milky Way so well defined, it had what astronomers call structure, that sense of its twisting depths. I remember stars from one horizon to the other, making the night sky so plush that it still seems like a dream. So much was right about that night. It was a time of my life when I was every day experiencing something new. I felt open to everything, as though I were made of clay and the world was imprinting upon me its breathtaking beauty. Standing nearly naked under that Moroccan sky, skin against the air, the dark, the stars, the night pressed its impression. and my lifelong connection was sealed. So like I said, that was one of those once in a lifetime experiences when I walked out in Morocco and saw a sky that's something like this. What much of the book concerns itself with, though, is the challenge presented to us by this, which is artificial light, and a special artificial light that is shining directly in our eye, into our eyes like this. We we can define light pollution as the overuse and the misuse of artificial light. So it's not that artificial light is bad or that we're not going to have it. We are going to have it. And I think light can be quite beautiful. It certainly is, it changes our lives for the better in many ways. It's just that we tend to use way more of it than we need, and we use it in ways that are unhelpful and even dangerous. And I'll show you some examples of what I'm talking about a little bit later. We have a whole lot of artificial light that we shine straight up into the sky, like these lights near this billboard, or that bounce off the billboard and go into the sky. We have a whole lot of lights that are horizontal lights like this. And this is, if you imagine taking this picture, you're the photographer, you're all lit up, right? And all these lights were supposed to do was light the parking lot in the foreground. They go way beyond the parking lot. All this overuse and misuse of light creates the situation that you see here in the satellite photographs. Many of you have probably seen images like this of the US, or certainly of the whole world here. That's caused by light pollution. And I'll give you three specific elements of light pollution that we can talk about. The first one is glare. This is the light, like the light I showed you earlier, that's shining directly into our eyes. It's making us hard to see. It's closing down our pupils. A lot of people that I know and that I've talked to over the last few years, when we talk about glare, they say, oh yeah, my neighbor has a light like this. It shines directly into my house. It comes into my bedroom. It comes into my living room, right? And there's nothing I can do about it. That's a real frustration for people. Another frustration for people is something we call light trespass. This is a good example in this image of the building on one side that's all lit up, and the lights are crossing the street to light up the house there on the other side. And if you look real closely, you might be able to see the black curtains that the students who are living in the house here have hung in the windows so that they can block that light out of their house. So light trespass. And then finally, we have something that we call sky glow here, which is what you see on the right hand image, which is what the sky usually looks like. What's neat about this slide here is that these photographs are taken from the exact same spot. It's just that the image on the left is one night, I think it was in 2003, when there was a power outage and a photographer walked down the street and took a picture of what the sky used to look like before light pollution. We can also talk about a recipe for light pollution, all the things that go into making these problems. I'll give you a few of the ingredients. Stadium lighting, as you see here on the lower left, is a huge problem for a lot of communities. Very bright lights, almost always unshielded and shining well into the night. Parking lots, even like this one. This is a Target parking lot at 3 a.m. in the morning. No cars there, but it's lit as brightly as always. Gas stations are a big contributor to light pollution. One of the things that I learned when I was researching the book that stays with me is that gas stations and parking lots in our country, in the US, are lit about 10 times as brightly as they were 20 years ago. So we've seen a real acceleration in the level of light and the level of brightness over the last couple decades. We also now have a lot, this is some people will recognize this image of Las Vegas, but what I want to show you here is actually the electronic billboard on the right-hand side of the screen. We're getting more and more of these in communities all over the country, extremely bright and oftentimes going all through the night. So again, we can see this from satellite images, this overuse and misuse of light at night. But the thing about these images that they don't show is really the extent of light pollution. You can see, and if you know Europe here, you can see the white splotches of the major cities, but it kind of looks like if you get out of those cities, if you get away from some of the lights, that there are dark areas. What I want to show you next, though, kind of shows the true extent of it, and it's something called the World Atlas of the Artificial Night Sky Brightness. Essentially, it's a world atlas of light pollution. The original one came out about 2001, and then an updated version came out just a couple of years ago. And so here you can see again the white splotches of the major cities: Madrid, Paris, London, Milan, Amsterdam. But what you can't see anymore are any spaces of black, of natural darkness. You have to get out into the ocean to get back to that original darkness, just to show the true extent of light pollution. In the US, what we can say about the US is that essentially there is no place east of the Great Plains that is not polluted by light now. Certainly it gets dark every night. We have various levels of dark, but it doesn't get back to that natural dark that it would have been before artificial light. This is kind of a neat image that shows the trajectory of where we might have been and where we're headed. The researchers who put this together actually used the data from 1997 that you see there and estimated backwards to the 70s and 50s, and then forward to what used to seem like a long time from now, but isn't so long anymore, 2025, to kind of show us where we're headed. And if you think back to that last image, we've kind of already gotten there now. It varies, the percentage of the growth of light pollution varies from estimate to estimate, but the number I often hear is 6% growth every year. Depends on where we are. Another way to think about the true extent of light pollution is something called the Bortle scale, put together by an amateur astronomer named John Bortle. He put together a 9-point scale. It's essentially a scale of darkness. So 9 is our brightest places, as you see here, inner city skies, working down to level 1 darkness, which would be those black areas I was talking about earlier, where there's no evidence of artificial light in the sky or on the horizon, as it would have been before electric light. Kind of the amazing thing I always think about this scale and thinking about it is that most Americans live most of their lives in level 5 and above. So most of us never see or never live at least under a sky any darker than that. So we're missing out on quite a dark sky. And in fact, when I started research for the end of night, I called up a friend of mine in the National Park Service and I said, "Where can I go to see Bortle level 1?" And he kind of laughed and he said, "I would recommend Australia." It turns out that there aren't so many places left in the US. Some people would say there are no places left with Bortle scale 1. Some people would say, yeah, there are a few places, but it has really become a rarity, that kind of darkness. I used the Bortle scale model, that 9-to-1, again, to use as my table of contents. And so I start in the book with some real bright places like Las Vegas. I go stargazing on the Strip in Las Vegas with the head of the Las Vegas Astronomical Society in the opening chapter. And I work my way down to some pretty dark places there at the end. I also wanted, though, to show you the table of contents just to show you some of the different issues that I deal with in the book, because this isn't just a problem for astronomers, and it's not just a problem for those of us who love the night sky. It's really a problem for all of us. And so we have issues, if you take a look at, for example, chapter 6 of the impact of artificial light to human physical health. You have chapter 5, which is all about the impact to ecology from artificial light, and I'll talk more about that in just a second. You have the impact in chapter 4 to our psychological health, even of light pollution. And then there's a number of chapters where I talk about the things we can do and some of what it feels like to experience some of this dark sky. I think the thing that motivates me the most, and this may hopefully make sense given what I said about being inspired as a kid in northern Minnesota, but the thing that motivates me the most about light pollution and the problem, the challenge of light pollution is the impact to our fellow creatures, to ecology. So many species are nocturnal, meaning they depend on darkness for life, essentially. And then many other species are crepuscular, meaning they're most active at dawn and at dusk. So you can imagine maybe that when we shine our lights into the sky, when we leave our lights on all night, when our buildings are all lit up, even though there's no one there, the impact to some of our fellow creatures can be tremendous. Many people have heard about the impact to migratory birds. And you see, this is one night's haul, as it were, in Toronto during migratory season a few years ago. Pretty dramatic. What people don't know about the impact on birds is a lot of the birds that fly into windows during the day were actually drawn into that area at night by our lights. So it goes, it's a problem both at night and during the day. Our lights at night are also a big problem for our insect populations, and this has started to get a lot more attention in the last few years as we've begun to notice some steep declines in insect populations around the world. And this is a big problem for a lot of reasons. Some of you may have read about this or know about this already. But specifically to light pollution, we are now finding that light pollution contributes to this decline in insect populations. And this is the kind of thing where so many of these lights are unnecessary at night. We could just turn them off and we could help reduce the impact to insect populations and to other nocturnal and crepuscular species. I like to show this image because it's kind of a dramatic image of artificial lights shining into the woods here and really essentially ruining that habitat for any kind of nocturnal or crepuscular species. I always, when we talk about light pollution, we have to spend a minute talking about security, safety, because so many people imagine that we need all this light that we have for safety and security. In fact, we could do with a lot less, and I'll give you an example of that here in just a second. I want to show you an image here of two images, essentially. It's the same image back to back with an adjustment I'll tell you about in just a second. In this first image, you can see the light, what we call a security light, or what some of my astronomer friends like to call an insecurity light. It's a light that is, like so many of the lights in our country, unshielded, which just means that the light is shining in all directions. It's shining into the sky, it's shining into your eyes, closing down your pupils, making it harder for you to see, just kind of going all over the place. It's not directed at all. The next image is the exact same image. The only difference is that the photographer is going to hold up his hand to mimic a shield on this light. And when he does, then you can see the bad guy standing in the fence, right? What happens when we shield our lights like this is that the shadow that's been created goes away. Your pupils are able to work as they should, and we can see the bad guy. He is actually here. I don't know if folks can see that in the image. It's just that the light is so bright, we can't see him. One of the things I invite people to do after the talk or whenever they find themselves out walking at night is to take a look at a situation like this where you see a light that's shining into your eyes, and just take a moment and hold your hand up to shield that light. See how much better you can see under that light and past that light. I almost guarantee you'll be able to see better. And this kind of mimics a basic idea when it comes to controlling light pollution, which is if we could just shield all our lights, not even turn them off, but just shield them, we could probably cut the problem just about in half right there. So it is a problem that we can do something about. Um, as we shield our lights, you can see on the bottom here, as we begin to shield them, we bring back the stars and we can see the bad guy down here too. So it's a win-win situation in so many respects. As I said at the start, though, the things that inspire me, in addition to wildlife, to ecology, and the reasons for controlling light pollution, things like it is a huge waste of money. All you have to do is think about all the light that's going up into the sky that's doing nobody any good. That's all wasted money, wasted energy. Um, when it comes back down to it, though, what inspires me the most is just the beauty of nights, and I include in that even some images of lighting at nights. I think lighting can be done effectively, even beautifully, like here in London on the Houses of Parliament on Big Ben, or certainly when we go to Paris. I spent a good amount of time in the book in Paris. This is Notre Dame, of course, and long before the devastating fire. But one of the stories of the relighting of Paris, they spent about 30 years relighting the city to create the atmosphere that the nocturnal atmosphere that draws so many people to the city. They spent 10 years on Notre Dame alone, and the designer, the lead designer, told me that the priests allowed the lighting designers to do whatever they wanted here with Notre Dame, except that they had the idea to do a kind of strobe light the length of the cathedral on the hour to mimic the bell. And the priest said, kind of waved his finger and said, this is a cathedral, not a disco. So they weren't able to do that. But otherwise, they got to do what they intended to do. My last few thoughts here, just coming into the home stretch of the talk here, and then I look forward to any questions that you might have about the book, about writing the book, about the inspiration, or certainly about the issue. This is probably my favorite image that I like to show, which is of the solitary human coming face to face here with the night sky. It's something that has happened as long as we have been around, right? And what I like to say is that with light pollution, we've taken what was one of the most common human experiences, that is walking out your door at night and coming face to face with the universe, and we've made it one of the most rare of human experiences, right? This, what you see here, just doesn't happen very often for very many of us. So why does that matter? Well, it matters for a lot of reasons. One of those reasons is the inspiration of night, the inspiration to artists, to writers, to painters, to dancers, to musicians, the inspiration to scientists, to philosophers, and just to the individual human being. What does it mean when you walk out and you see something so big, so beautiful, so incomprehensible? How does that make you reflect on your life? Most of us just don't even have that chance, right? Aha, I forgot I had this one in. This is neat. A friend of mine who's an astronomer updated Van Gogh's famous painting here, done in 1886 in the south of France, for today in a world of light pollution. And here is the update. I have my own update, which is since I've written the book, I've become a father, and a lot of what I think about now is what the world is going to be like for my daughter as she grows. What is the night sky going to be like for her as she gets older? And she's 2 now, and she's already, when she sees it, she'll point and say, moon. She loves to see the moon. So it's already started. We certainly have her started reading early, reading the classics here, as you can see. And I just look forward to seeing where she leads me in the future as we grow forward. So I'll leave you with an image. Last image of the talk here is one of those places that, when we think about the darkest places left in the US, I had a chance to go out with one of the park rangers who ranks the levels of darkness for the National Park Service. And he said he had ranked only 3 out of the 200 places he'd ranked darkness as level 1. And this was one of them. This is Death Valley and the racetrack area of Death Valley. Maybe there's some folks out there who've been there. He said this is one of the 3 places he would say was a level 1. So it's a nice image to end on, and I certainly look forward to your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul. Virtual round of applause for our guest. Everybody drop clapping hands emojis into the chat box. Paul, thank you so much. I'm going to leave it on this image for just a minute because it's gorgeous. And I've never seen a night sky like that. That's just phenomenal. I grew up in pretty close to the downtown area in Nashville, which is no major city by any stretch compared to some of the other big cities in the US. But it wasn't until we got out into a very rural part of the state on a camping trip that I even knew that a full moon could cast that silvery glow over the ground. And as a kid, that blew me away that the moon was actually that bright. How do we get more folks to have those kinds of experiences? Because it seems so integral to beginning to care about an issue like this, or take action, or shield the lights on your house.
Yeah, absolutely. Good question. And I'll say that first, going back to the image, I mean, one of the things that we have to acknowledge is that these are photographs, and that the camera is able to do things that our eyes aren't. I'm always a little bit, I won't say disappointed, but I definitely notice it when I even see a wonderful night sky, and sometimes I think, man, this isn't quite like I remember the photograph being, but that's because a camera isn't. I'll show you. I actually went past it pretty quickly. The image before is a photograph that's much less sort of processed, and I can tell you this is from Death Valley. I can tell you this is really what I remember it looking like when I was there, even with my own eyes. So it can be pretty spectacular if you get, certainly being in a desert helps when there's less moisture in the air, and obviously the lack of artificial light. But you raise a really, really important point, which is getting ourselves out into having these kinds of firsthand experiences with the night sky, with night in general, and maybe especially getting our children out to having these experiences. It's really hard, if not impossible, to care about something that you haven't been exposed to, that you haven't experienced firsthand. And I can tell you that, once you do see something like this, it stays with you. I think one of the great things the national parks now are doing is that they are considering darkness one of the resources that they are trying to protect for generations to come. And a lot of people are having their first experience of a spectacular night sky in the national parks. And I think that can, I always think we go to the national parks, we have these experiences, and we don't forget them. We take them back with us where we live. So that's one way. The other way is I always want to make the point that night can be a really pretty special, phenomenal place, even if you're not under a sky that looks like this, or you're not in a national park. Even here in Minneapolis, I'll walk outside at night and just watch the moon, and I can probably only see a couple dozen stars, but the moon is still pretty darn beautiful, and I like being out there anyway. So I think the bottom line is just getting ourselves out into the night and learning to appreciate how special it can be.
Well, I'm going to grab some questions from the chat to pose to you. We'll see what all of our viewers are thinking about tonight's topic. Glenn is saying that he read that cities are adding more lights because LED lighting is cheaper to operate than sodium vapor lights. Thoughts? Comments?
Yeah, so thank you for the comment, Glenn. The problem of LEDs was described to me when I was writing the book 6 or 7 years ago as a tsunami. That we were right on the verge then of what has since happened in most places of the country, which is cities installing LEDs precisely because of the cost savings. They tend to use they do use less energy than this is electronic lighting, and they use less energy than the electric lighting that we're so used to. The problem is that there are a lot of different kinds of LEDs, and the technology is changing all the time. And a lot of the cities that jumped on the bandwagon early installed LEDs that are rich in what's called blue rich white light, which is exactly the kind of light that we don't want to be seeing at night, nor does anything else living out there. Since then, LEDs have gradually evolved. The technology has changed. Some cities, like Phoenix, for example, have installed streetlights, LED streetlights that are more, I guess I'd say, friendlier to the night sky, friendlier to life on Earth. But the problem remains that a lot of places LEDs can make the night brighter, not only because of the technology, but just because we haven't learned to use light any differently over the years. And so, gosh, it's cheaper. Let's use more of it. Seems to be one of the things that people think. So LEDs are a challenge. I always talk about them in terms of promise. They're highly controllable, which is pretty neat, but also peril because of some of the things I've said.
Allie writes that they mostly hear about light pollution in regards to baby turtles on beaches because they confuse it for the moon. Did you happen to deal with sea turtles in your book?
I don't write directly about turtles in the book, but I certainly know about that issue. I would say if people have heard about the impacts to species, they've either heard about turtles or about the birds. Those seem to be the two main issues. Some good news is that a lot of communities along the coasts have along the Atlantic coast and the Gulf Coast have worked to shield the lights, to use only red or orange lights, that kind of thing, to help the turtles. So there are some good things happening that way, but it continues to be a challenge for life on Earth, I would say.
Let's see. The next one that came in here, I don't expect you to know the answer to this one, but you might be able to speak to how municipalities and local governments are dealing with light pollution. Constantine writes that they live in Durham, just up the road here, and heard that they could report unshielded LED lights and the city will shade them. I don't know if you know if that's true or not. I don't know. I'd have to go look around on the web. But that might be a good question about how cities and local governments operate.
It probably depends a little bit on this specific community, what that might mean. But I know that so one of the I guess good things you might say about LEDs is that they're very directional. So they tend to go in the direction in which you point them. And so if they, for example, are installed incorrectly, which is to say that they're meant to shine straight down, but a lot of times they're installed with a little bit of a rise like that, and then they're going to be shining in the wrong direction. And that might be what they're talking about. If you see something like that, the city will come out and correct that. I have also heard of there are instances in communities where Yeah, if you complain, they will come out and put an actual shield around the light to kind of cut down on some of that glare. I think it probably depends. It's worth looking at what Durham actually, what they mean by that. Because if there's a light that's bothering your I want to say caller, it's not your typist. Maybe they can get that controlled.
Let's see. There's a good number of comments here about folks just sharing cool experiences. Cynthia wrote that when my children's friends would come to our house in the quote country, they often gasped as they looked up and said, "You have stars," and says that definitely missing a big part of the human experience. Is a dark sky part of something we would consider part of the human experience? I mean, I guess we all look up, but globally, would we consider something that we're missing out?
Yeah, I mean, I would say absolutely, Chris. I think that's really a huge. That might be one of the main. Well, that is one of the main themes of my book, The End of Night. Is just that we have had this experience of the stars, of a night sky, of a starry night, for all of human history up until, gosh, just the last, depends where you are, but let's just say the last 50 or 70 years. So oftentimes in my talks, I'll have folks sharing their experiences, and unfortunately it tends to be folks in their, let's say 70s and 80s, who grew up at a time when there weren't lights anywhere. And it's much more rare to have somebody who's maybe younger than 40 or so, who's had that experience. That we've kind of grown, so many of us have now grown up just to swamped in light, right? So yeah, what does it mean to be human? Until about 50, 70 years ago, it meant walking out your door and coming face to face with the universe. It doesn't mean that anymore. And I think what I've tried to get at in the book is, what we've lost, and what we're losing, and really what we can gain if we know how to control this problem. That's the good news. So we just have to get serious about it.
This next one is actually related to something you just mentioned. Karen writes, I have a friend who believes that the ancient Greeks and Romans saw many more stars than we do now, and that the constellations were much more detailed. Is that possible?
Oh yeah, totally possible. In fact, one of the kind of amazing things that happens once you learn learn some of the constellations, for example, you kind of learn the main stars. And then you get to some place that is truly dark. Those constellations become harder in some ways to pick out because there's so many other stars around them. I remember, so I taught at Wake Forest in Winston-Salem for a couple of years, and I remember walking home one night. I looked to the east, and there was Orion rising in the sky. Most of us know what that looks like, with the hunter with the 3 stars in his belt. And I thought, oh, that's great. I can see Orion. I love Orion. That's so awesome. And then I learned out pretty soon after that the stars in Orion are brighter than 98 or 99% of the stars in the sky. So it makes you think about, wow, what am I not seeing when I just see those stars in Orion?
Yeah, one of my favorite facts about Orion is that one of the stars is actually a nebula, right? Like there's a whole enormous cloud of gas
Mm.
and forming stars, I think, that you don't notice. You can't see in a light polluted sky. You have
Yep.
to look that much more closely just to see the splendor that goes beyond that. Okay, let's see. Here's one from Facebook. Jennifer is saying that they're a member of the Dark Sky Association. How much are groups like that able to get accomplished?
That's great. Jennifer, I'm glad you're part of the IDA. The International Dark Sky Association is really the group when it comes to light pollution. I think they've done extraordinary work especially to get the word out. I mean, so many Americans just don't even know that there is this thing called light pollution. That there is this concept that we're using more light than we need and using it in ways that aren't so positive. So the IDA has done really wonderful work to get the word out, and they help communities to um, shape lighting ordinances, for example, to control the light in their communities. They just do all sorts of work, and I would invite folks to learn more to visit their website, which is www.darksky.org. You can learn so much about this issue just from visiting that site.
So I'm curious, in doing the research and the work to write your book, The End of Night, you talk to lots of different people who benefit or don't benefit from dark skies, physicists, astronomers, that sort of thing. Who are the people that you feel like uh, benefit the least or dislike dark skies the most?
Well, certainly astronomers, amateur astronomers do. Although I was told, I think actually in France, I was told that the most important instrument for astronomers now is not the telescope, but the automobile, meaning that they need to be able to get somewhere dark in order to see the stars. Um, but I'm tempted to say, like so many issues, it tends to impact folks who are not so privileged, that are not so who don't have the resources that some of us have. Who just can't get to someplace dark, even if they wanted to. They're stuck somewhere without those means, and so a lot of times those folks have little choice in the kind of nighttime environment that um, they find themselves in. Um, and then the broader answer to that is especially when we start talking about, which I only glanced at a little bit, but the impact of artificial light to our physical health impacts anybody who is exposed to artificial light at night. And that can have a real effect on folks, especially who uh, are shift workers or folks who work the night shift for sure. They have, it's not a problem of astronomical light pollution, but it certainly is a problem of our use of artificial light at night.
Good stuff. Daniel is asking, in addition to programs like this one, do you have ideas on how museums can further engage the public at the intersection of the arts and humanities and the sciences?
That's a great question. I think, the
Very
way
good
that
question.
yeah. um, there are I think there's a lot of really good work going on in the arts by people like me who really respect science and want to build bridges between the arts and sciences. I think the separation between the two is really a false separation that we really learn from each other. And I think places like museums and other places like that. I've done a lot of talks at museums. I've done talks at national parks. I've done talks at um, different schools, different branches of universities, that kind of thing. And I think just inviting people in to tell their story in whatever media they use, whether it's in my case literature and photographs, storytelling, um, painting, movies, what have you. I mean, it's looking for that, looking for those folks, those artists who, and more people are connected to night skies specifically, but just in general, there's a lot of folks out there who would be happy to come and engage a museum audience.
We're working on it too, Daniel. Don't worry. It's not all scientists that we try to bring into our space either. Um, in fact, we've got a cool one that's going to be coming up at the end of June. Keep an eye out on the museum's website. We're bringing in an artist who uses science as their artistic medium in a way. So keep an eye out for that one. We'll have more details up on that one in the next couple of weeks, I think, when we get that one squared away. Because, yeah, natural history museums, especially, I think, uh, a collections-based museum is a library of the natural world. In so many ways, we preserve the past to help us learn more about the future. Um, but at our museum, for example, we've made our collection available to more than just biologists and ecologists and zoologists coming through, because a museum can be a great resource to an artistic community as well. And I think that's a cool function that museums like ours serve as well.
Yeah.
All right, I'm doing one last screen over here of the Q&A. Some folks are very concerned about the sea turtles. The sea turtles. And I read a study not just a few days ago too, even fireflies. I call it, they're the official insect of summer. Especially here in North Carolina, they have a direct association to the seasons, and even fireflies can be what would be the right word, impacted by artificial light, because that's how they actually communicate, is with light.
Yeah, absolutely. Fireflies have definitely been impacted by light pollution, by the overuse of light, and of course by pesticides are a huge problem. I mean, folks should know, if they don't, that firefly populations are really dwindling, and in a lot of places where they used to be, they are no longer. And that's that is one of the most beautiful things you've ever seen at night, is to see a field full of fireflies, and to not be able to see that is a real loss.
Well, Paul, thank you so much for joining us and sharing.
Yeah, my pleasure, Chris. Thank you for having me.
Everyone, I hope that you enjoyed the program. Again, thanks for joining us. Thank you for tuning in. If you want to know when we're bringing more guest speakers onto the Virtual Science Cafe stage, you can follow the museum online on social media, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. All three, we are at Natural Sciences. Or you can visit naturalsciences.org and check out the schedule of events. Right there on the homepage, there's a big link for Science at Home. There you can find do-it-yourself activities. So if you get tired of looking at computer screens all day, you can grab a do-it-yourself science activity and go participate in that. There's also an archive of past cafes and events from the museum. So if you want to learn something new, there's an archive of hundreds of videos there that's available for you. And even more resources, as well as what live events are coming up that we'll be doing virtually here on YouTube or at the museum's Facebook page. So give us a like, a follow, a share. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Did I say everything I needed to say? The end of night, Paul Bogard, thank you so very much for being with us once again. And everybody get out and find some dark skies. I hope that you can soon. In the meantime, my name's Chris, signing off. Take care, everybody. Stay safe. And we'll see you again at the museum real soon. Bye, everyone.